Teaching and learning are the central focuses of schools, yet educational administration often ignores these aspects in favor of discussing politics, governing systems, finances, and politics. Why? Schooling has become universal in that mass forms of education have been devised. This has been a deliberate choice and not an inevitable outcome. Mass schooling could look different than it does today. It could be non-compulsory, it could be spread over more hours of the day, it could involve more independent study or work at home, and it could be spread over more years. But the decision to organize schools using a factory model was made. In that, though, there's an organizational problem. What do you do with a large number of students who are required to be in attendance for 5 to 6 hours every day? There are 3 effects in the standardized model of schooling. Schools tend to be separated from the rest of the community. There isn't a whole lot of room for other adults in the school other than teachers. Windows are usually blocked to save energy, and there's a lot of stuff in the classrooms, desks, chairs, computers, what have you, and there are few spaces in schools for students to do group work. The second is supervision and control. Schools literally have custody over their students during the school day, and they must ensure their safety and their presence, and students must also be supervised. And the third is timetable. Movements of everyone in the school, whether it's teachers, students, staff, they are all regulated by the schedule and the clock. Teachers must organize their instruction to fit those time periods, regardless of their own teaching style or of their students' needs. It also breaks up the continuity or the flow of any lessons or activities that are going on in the classroom. Fundamental to understanding the nature of teaching is appreciating the uncertain relationship between teaching and learning. It's evident that there's no single approach to learning that will work for all students. Students learn different things in different ways at different times with varying speeds. Some might see this as a problem to be remedied, but let's be real. Variety is the spice of life. Essentially, the organization of learning is determined for students. When to do something, how to do it, and what to do. Many teachers realize that education cannot be standardized and have made changes to the delivery methods and how they structure things in class. However, it's difficult as teachers to change the system, as we're governed by school boards, regulated by administration, and so on. So what do we do? In elementary schools, the emphasis is placed on the development of academic skills, as well as behavior, motivation, and the all-around development of the child. Middle schools are hybrids of elementary and secondary schools. They help ease the transition of students into secondary schools, and middle schools are generally organized around team teaching. Finally, secondary schools place a lot more stress on specialized subject areas, and a lot less emphasis on students as individual learners. As well, teachers' content knowledge becomes much more important. Schools and teachers often grapple with the tension between common goals and diverse people. It's a lot easier just to group people according to their skills and interests. In terms of grouping in elementary school, you will find what they call within-class ability grouping, and this just basically means that students are broken off into groups and given differentiated work according to their perceived capacity. In secondary schools, you will find tracking or streaming. Entire courses are differentiated by their perceived difficulty. Students either choose or are placed in those courses depending on their perceived capacity or their willingness to do the work required in those courses. However, some teachers must now teach entire classes of students who are regarded as less able, less interested, and thus more difficult to teach. Research shows that students in general, basic, and vocational tracks have less instructional time, have less challenging tasks, have fewer chances to discuss ideas, and generally have a significantly inferior educational experience. Schools are are responsible for organizing knowledge. Chapter 7 outlines 4 of these ways. The first is formal. Formal curricula is primarily organized by the Department or Ministry of Education in each province. Provincial curricula vary in how descriptive they are. The second is curriculum implementation. Given the relative autonomy and isolation of most classrooms, teachers actually have a lot of room to use curriculum documents in different ways, so it's not standardized. The third is curricula and the organization of knowledge. The fourth is hidden curricula. Much of what happens in schools has to do with the influencing of behavior rather than with the learning of prescribed content or skills. Just think about it. In schools, you don't really get in trouble for not getting the right answer, but if you talk back to a teacher, you better watch your back. It's important to recognize that these are choices that reflect somebody's view of the world, and they are not necessarily the only way of thinking. Being a teacher in a classroom is a highly demanding activity. Are students learning to learn on their own? Are students developing an appreciation of a particular subject? Are they getting it? Chapter 7 outlines 4 endemic tensions in teaching. The first is wait and response time. Often, teachers don't give their students enough time to process a question, and therefore they think their students do not know the answer when the student hasn't been able to process the question yet. The second is allocation of teachers' time for our students. Teachers will often want to spend more time with those students that don't quite get it or need some extra help rather than with the rest of the class, or even those who maybe want to get the next step for the assignment or the work or whatever it is that you're doing. So it's important to find that balance. The third tension is covering the curriculum versus students' interests. And the fourth tension is learning and evaluation. What do you do with a student who has improved considerably throughout the semester, yet still only gets C's? Chapter 7 alludes to a consistent body of research, which is largely American, which shows that students generally find school to be boring at all levels for a couple different reasons. Students might be trying to figure out what the teacher wants. Students might be worried about getting good marks. Students might have little to no say about the nature of their schooling, or they don't see connections between work, schoolwork, or activities and their own lives outside of school. As well as there could be sexism in the class that is making students uncomfortable or unwilling to answer questions or to participate in classroom discussions or activities, as well as a majority of questions that are being asked of students are single correct answer type questions. And actually some students can get mad at teachers who create open-ended debates because they just want to know what the right answer is. Let's be real here. Grades in high school aren't necessarily predicative of success in adult life. The development of special ed has been shaped by 2 simultaneous but contradictory elements. The first is normalization, which states that services to people with disabilities should be as similar as possible to those provided to the rest of the population. Yet, a large part of specialized education involves identifying students as having particular problems and then programming to meet their needs, thereby setting them apart from the other students. This is an issue that has played out in my practicum school. When I was a high school student there, I knew that there was a program for students with disabilities, but I rarely saw them around school. A couple of years ago, I had the chance to be an EA in my old high school. So when I went back, I definitely noticed that students with disabilities were a lot more prevalent around the school. They worked in the cafeteria, they took out recycling, they stocked vending machines, they did a whole bunch of things, and they were, just a lot more included in school life and school activity. So they definitely had a greater presence in the school. And I also got to be working in the high school as they started implementing new programs where students with disabilities would actually go into classrooms to do, their own programmed work. So they would do that but in that classroom. So let's say they were working on math that day. Well, they would take their math into another math class. So rather than staying in their secluded area, in their transitions area, they would actually take their math work with an EA to a math class where their peers were. And you could definitely see like they were participating, not necessarily in that coursework, but they were participating in the classroom community, and it was just very neat to see. Inclusion has often replaced mainstreaming. Inclusion has a similar focus on trying to provide for all students in classroom settings, but whereas mainstreaming refers to students with disabilities, mainly, inclusion is used to refer to students with various other differences, such as language, ethnicity, or social class. Inclusion is now quite well established in Canadian schools. In conclusion, teaching is a very difficult undertaking, but variety is a powerful stimulus and a source of interest in our lives and in our work. As teachers, we have the requirement and the opportunity to become lifelong learners, to learn more about our students, about ourselves, about the curriculum, and educational in general as we go.